Welcome to this final lesson in our series of lessons from the book of Proverbs. This lesson is entitled Speaking Wisely, and it will come from passages in chapters 25 and 26. Chapter 25 begins in verse 1. These are more proverbs of Solomon, compiled by the men of Hezekiah, king of Judah, suggesting that Solomon had left a lot of proverbs. Maybe had compiled a portion of the book himself, but then later the men of Hezekiah's kingdom of palace, they compiled even more of Solomon's proverbs. So we're looking again at proverbs, probably coming from Solomon, but probably not included in the book until later at the time of King Hezekiah. Now, we've talked about the book of Proverbs as being a book of wisdom. And the book is giving advice that can be used by a father to teach his son, especially a king to teach his son who would become king, but by a father to giving his son advice on how to live successfully. And remember, we said that with Hebrew wisdom literature, that Hebrew wisdom literature is distinctive because it always starts with God. The wisdom literature of the secular world talks about how to be successful materially. However, the wisdom literature in the Old Testament are books trying to help us understand how to live successfully in harmony with God's plan and God's order. The Hebrews started with the idea that God created man and all the universe and established it in an orderly process, and that to live successfully, man needed to live in harmony with God's plan. So that's what these proverbs are intended to do, is help the young man to understand how to live in harmony with God's plan. Now, the book has like a lot of proverbs, a lot of little statements, a lot of little pithy lines. We're going to be looking at two passages, and the theme around these passages is that of speaking wisely. Now, there are a lot of other proverbs in the book that speak to this issue of wise speech, but we're going to be looking in chapters 25 and 26 on speaking wisely. Now, let's talk about the idea of words. Probably most of us remember the little line we either heard as a child, or maybe we even taught our child. Sticks and stones will break my bones, but words will never hurt me. And we know that's not true. We know that words can hurt. We know that words can cause serious damage to a relationship. Words can bring on depression. And with the advent of social media, and the idea that you can express yourself in a sense of anonymity, that is, you don't necessarily have to identify yourself. People say some terrible things that's very, very hurtful, and there's even been a case not too long ago where a young female high school student committed suicide because she was being bullied at school and bullied on the internet to the point that she just couldn't take it anymore, and she committed suicide. So words can really have a damage, can have an injurious effect. The Bible is full of stories of how words have caused an issue. The story of Moses, when Aaron and Miriam spoke against Moses, what happened? Miriam was immediately struck with leprosy. Excuse me. When Nabal was approached by David's men and asked for supplies, after all, they'd been protecting him and his cattle, his flocks, they asked him for supplies, and he refused them and said some terrible things. And of course, we know what happened. He ended up being killed, and his wife, Abigail, ended up marrying David. There's a couple of Old Testament stories where words have had some serious consequences. When Elisha, remember the story of Elisha, after Nahum, the foreign general, came to him with leprosy, and Elisha told him to go and wash himself in the river, and he did and was cleansed, and he came back and offered Elisha a big reward, and Elisha turned it down. And after he left, Gehazi followed Nahum and told him that Elisha had changed his mind and he should give him something. And of course, we know what happened to Gehazi. He immediately was struck with leprosy. So there are stories in the Old Testament of how the improper use of words has resulted in some very drastic consequences. In his letter to the Colossians and to the Ephesians in the New Testament, Paul warned against corrupt speech, and he urged the people to be gracious in their speech, building one another up. The letter written by James has a very significant statement about the danger of the tongue. He makes the statement that the tongue is like a spark of fire. It's a very small thing, but it can create a very small spark, can create a huge forest fire. And so the tongue can likewise cause a real uproar just by an ill-spoken word. So we want to look at how Solomon suggests we speak so that we are not causing problems. Now we know speech can be very motivational. Lincoln's Gettysburg Address, Winston Churchill's statement, "We shall fight on the beaches," that speech he gave. We know there are lots of times that people have been, John F. Kennedy's, "Ask not what your country can do for you, but ask what you can do for your country." Very motivational, very inspiring. The choice we make as to what we say needs to be understood is a reflection of what's on the inside the heart. We've already talked about the fact that from the heart is the wellspring of everything that we say and do. And so when we speak, when we choose unwisely, we are reflecting what's going on inside. Well, let's look in chapter 25 and let's look down to verse 11. Chapter 25, verse 11. He says, a word aptly spoken is like apples of gold in settings of silver. Solomon says a word chosen properly, a wise word, a word of encouragement, a word of building up. A aptly spoken word is very, very valuable. And he compares it to apples of gold set in a silver setting. Now, this could mean a couple things. It could be a figurine where you have actually physical objects made of gold that look like apples that are then on a silver tray. Some suggest that this may have been a design on a wall or a column where there were apples on there in gold that was set against a silver setting. But what we recognize, though, is that gold and silver are very valuable. In that day and time especially, gold and silver were very, very, very valuable. And so a word aptly spoken, a word properly chosen, is very, very valuable. It's like gold and silver. Going to verse 12. Like an earring of gold or an ornament of fine gold is a man's wise rebuke to a listening ear. A man's wise rebuke. Now, to be rebuked is normally not something that we like, is not something that we take kindly to. We don't like other people telling us what to do or how we should do it or why we did it wrong. But really, the wise person, and that's what he says here, he says, a wise man's rebuke to a listening ear. The wise man is always open to listen. He's always open to learn. And so when a word is chosen wisely, even though it may be a rebuke, and even though it may be something that in the normal course of things would not be accepted with any pleasure, the wise man would listen to that, and he receives that. And he says, it's like an earring of gold or an ornament of fine gold. Now, all the men and women in that day and time would wear jewelry, earrings, nose rings. So an earring of gold, but an ornament, and then he says fine jewelry, fine gold. Now, you need to understand the difference between gold and fine gold. Fine gold is the gold that's been purified through the fire. The impurities have been removed, so it is exceptionally valuable. Okay? So a rebuke to a wise man is going to be very valuable. Very, very valuable. There is a the word the word would suggest that we do not go off rebuking just for the sake of rebuking. That wouldn't be very wise. That's probably more out of my self-centeredness. But a rebuke that is delivered out of a heart of wisdom. That is, we feel like it needs to be said. We feel led to say it. We feel like this is in harmony with God's will. And I would suggest to you, it's not only what we say, but it's how we say it. It's how we say it that can be of significance when you're issuing a rebuke. A rebuke can be that which is very helpful to the listening ear. Verse 13. Like the coolness of the snow at harvest time is a trustworthy messenger to those who send him. He refreshes the spirit of his masters. Okay, this is a little different here. And now we're talking about telling the truth. Now we're talking about being reliable. Israel was an agricultural nation. Most of the people would labor all day out in the fields and get paid in the evening, and that's what they would have to live on. Okay? Harvesting wheat, barley, and other crops was very labor intensive. In that area of the world, in the summertime, during the harvest, it was very, very hot. Very, very humid. And so working out in the field, it would be very, very desirable once in a while to have a cool drink of water. Now, snow doesn't fall in many parts of Israel. Israel is pretty much without snow. However, in Mount Hermon, on Mount Hermon, they received a substantial amount of snow. So the Israelites knew, even if at a distance, they knew about snow. And they knew how cold snow was. And they also knew something about that as that snow would melt, the river that would flow with that melted snow would be very, very cool. And that would be a very, very refreshing drink for someone working in the fields. So, like the coolness of snow at harvest time is the trustworthy messenger to those who send him. He refreshes the spirit of his master. They depended upon couriers to carry messages. Whether they were verbal messages or whether they were written messages, they had no other communication system, so they depended upon the courier. Now, one of the problems was if you didn't have a very dependable courier, your message may not get there, or if it did get there, it may not be the message that you sent. And what he's saying here is, the one who chooses wisely, that is, to be faithful and true to the message and carry the exact message as was sent, he is a real blessing to the one who is sending him, to his master, to the king, of whoever it is. He is a real blessing to the one who sent him. One commentator wrote this: during the hot summers, laborers brought snow and ice from the high mountains and stored them in snow houses or snow caves. They were transported, for example, insulated by jute. So they would actually bring snow to the fields and try to have fresh, cold water to refresh the workers. And he's saying, the one who chooses to speak honestly and be faithful to the message, he is a real blessing to the ones who sent him. Let's look on down to verse 14. Like clouds and winds without rain is a man who boasts of gifts he does not give. Now here's a contrast. We've been talking about when we choose wisely in what we say. That is, when we give the rebuke properly, when we make an apt statement, choose wisely what we say. Now here is a contrast. And this is the one that is the negative. He says, the one who boasts of gifts he does not give. The one who is talking about how generous he is and how he always is giving gifts and he never delivers. The King James actually translates this as falsely boasts of giving. The idea is that you get a reputation. You get a reputation for being never delivering, not following through. And he describes him this way. He says, like the clouds and wind without rain. Now, rain was a very important factor in the life of the people of Israel. And they needed it to rain at certain times of the year for their crops. And they knew how to tell the weather. When they saw wind blowing, clouds coming together, they knew there was going to be a storm. And they expected rain. And a major disappointment would be when they needed rain to have the winds blow and the clouds cloud up and it not rain. That would be a major disappointment. He says, this is the way people feel about the one who's talking about what he's going to do, but never gets around to doing it. The one who boasts falsely of giving gifts. The lesson here is, be careful about making false promises. Be careful about promising something you're not going to do. In learning to discipline my children, I realized very quickly, you better not promise to do something unless you actually are willing to carry it out. They get your number real quick. Like people understand who they can trust and who they can rely upon. And he's saying, Solomon's saying, choose wisely. Choose your speech to deliver promises that you will intend to carry through. Verse 15. Through patience, a ruler can be persuaded, and a gentle tongue can break a bone. Now, what we're talking about here is talking about being patient, having your anger come from patience. Now, technically, the word here is the one who has a long nose. When you get mad, when you get angry, your face gets real red, and you speak out of passion. The word for patience comes from that idea. The word patience is the one who speaks without getting so upset, who can speak patiently, who can speak gently, who can build up. In our human condition, to have to say something a second time gets us frustrated. But the wise person is very patient, is very willing to continue on trying to convey his message. Suggests that it's not only what we say, but it's how we say it. Wisdom for speaking. It's not only what you say, but it's how you say it. Now, that's what he's talking about. Through patience, a ruler can be persuaded. The idea is that if you are appearing before the king and you have a request, if you speak out of patience, you go and make demands, you probably don't get anywhere. In case you hadn't noticed, you don't usually get anywhere when you go to an official and make a demand. When you go in and ask, and do so patiently, even if he starts with the idea of not granting your request, by talking patiently, you may even persuade him to change his mind. This is the beauty of speaking patiently rather than making demands and being angry all the time. So he says, through patience, a ruler can be persuaded. Then he makes a statement that is kind of an oxymoron. A gentle tongue can break a bone. Now, a bone is thought to be something very, very hard, and it takes a lot to break it. A lot of pressure, a lot of force to break it. The tongue is thought to be very gentle, very, it's not that, doesn't have that kind of strength. Just as you would not expect the tongue to break a bone, it's kind of not expected as to how patient speaking can make a whole difference in a situation. Again, it's not only what you say, it's how you say it. You can resolve some real situations, some real difficult situations, if you can speak patiently rather than speaking very angrily, a lot of passion, and it's not saying you don't have strong feelings, but just convey yourself in a way that is soothing and building up and contributing to the situation. Be careful how you say what you say. Well, let's look over to chapter 26. In chapter 26, we want to go down to verse 17. Verse 17 reads, "Like one who seizes a dog by the ears is a passerby who meddles in a quarrel not his own." Now, these next few verses are going to be dealing with the quarrelsome person. The person whose speech ends up resulting in quarrels, causing conflict, stirring the pot, if you will, in the colloquial today. Their speech is always causing trouble. He starts off, at least in our passage here, and he says, it's like one who, passing by, sees a stray dog and grabs him by the ears. Now, we have to understand, in that day and time, they did not domesticate dogs. Dogs ran at large. Dogs ran wild. They fed off of garbage. They fed off of animals that they could kill. They were just wild animals. Now, you can imagine, even with a domesticated pet, you grab a dog by his ears, you're liable to have a reaction. But especially a wild dog. You grab him by his ears, and the situation is such that you have put yourself in a position, if you've got both of his ears, you have put yourself in a position that when he reacts, there's not a whole lot you can do. You can't really get away fast enough because you've got both hands right there and he's ready to take a bite out of you. So he says, when you go getting involved in quarrels, it's just like grabbing a dog by his ears. It's not necessary. You don't need to do that. There's nothing good that can come from grabbing a dog by his ears. Now, if it's a domesticated dog and you're playing with a dog and the dog, but I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about these wild dogs. With a wild dog, there was nothing to be gained by grabbing it by its ears. That's what he's saying here about the quarrelsome person. You're never going to get anything good coming from getting involved in a quarrel that's not your own. So, be careful. Don't go speaking your mind into things that you don't have any business in. Don't go meddling in someone else's quarrels. Again, how you say, what you say, when you say it. All advice from Solomon. And then down to verse 18 and 19. Like a madman shooting firebrands or deadly arrows is a man who deceives his neighbor and says, I was only joking. I was only joking. Now, in that day and time, one of the major the weapons of the soldier, of the army, was an arrow, bow and arrow. And what they would often do is they would take an arrow and dip it in tar, dip the tip of it in tar, and then they would light it and then shoot it. Now, the reason they would shoot that flaming arrow is because it did much more destruction when it made a hit. If it hits the individual or hits at a house, it's going to cause that individual to catch on fire. It's going to cause that house to catch on fire. You shoot it into the granary where the grain is all stored. You're going to cause the grain to get on fire. In other words, you can do a lot more damage with a flaming arrow. And he says, like a madman, someone who is not acting rationally, someone that's just shooting these arrows up in the air, not really considering the consequences, not really caring what's going to happen. Very destructive. And he doesn't really care about what's going to happen. So he says, like a madman shooting firebrands or deadly arrows is a man who deceives his neighbor and says, I was only joking. Now, who is this person? It's the one who makes a statement, doesn't mean it, offends somebody, and then passes it off. I was only joking. I was only joking. How you say it, what you say, how you say it, when you say it. He says, this idea that I was only joking. Let me read what one writer says. As long as there is an ear to receive and a tongue to pass on, some piece of malicious slander will continue to circulate. But directly it reaches the hearer, who will not whisper it forward in that direction, at least its progress is arrested. We're talking about gossip. The one who shoots the madman, who just says all kinds of things. He's the one who says, I was only joking. He says, I didn't really mean it. When you say stuff about people and you don't really mean it, that can cause real problems. That can cause real problems. And he goes on to that in verse 20. He says, without wood or fire, a fire goes out. Without gossip, a quarrel dies down. And now he's really getting to gossip. The idea is a fire cannot burn without wood. A quarrel will not exist without gossip. This idea of like a madman shooting, saying things that he doesn't really care about, then saying, well, I really didn't mean it. I was just joking. Saying, be careful. Say what you mean and mean what you say. Be careful what you say, how you say it, when you say it. He said, you're like a madman shooting fire arrows, and you don't care what happens. You start spreading this gossip, and it's going to be like wood to a fire. It's going to cause more damage than you could ever imagine. Well, it goes on and says, as charcoal to embers and wood to fire, so is a quarrelsome man for kindling strife. The quarrelsome man is the one that chooses to spread gossip. The one that chooses to fire these arrows into the air and then say, oh, I didn't really mean it. No big harm, no big deal. He's saying, you take a fire and it's burnt down, and it's just nothing but coals. You stir it up, what happens? It flames up. He said, that's the same way it is with further gossip. You've got a situation, you've got a quarrel, you've got some tension, and then something's said, and it flames up again. This is what he's saying, be careful of. As charcoal to embers and as wood to fire, so is a quarrelsome man for kindling strife. Even though you say I don't mean it, that's the way gossip starts. Well, I really didn't mean it. Well, I thought it was true. Hey, speak carefully, speak wisely. As Paul said, speak that which builds up, not tears down. This is wisdom speaking. Verse 22. The words of gossip are like choice morsels. They go down to the man's innermost parts, or inmost parts. A choice morsel is that which is sweet. It's attractive. It's desirable. Unfortunately, gossip can sometimes be very, very entertaining or attractive. Can be very, very such that we get our attention off of what's true and wise. And he says that the morsel goes down into the inner being. It goes down to your stomach. That's what it's talking about. The same way, gossip goes down to our heart, our inner being, and it influences the way we think. You listen to gossip about somebody and your whole image of that person, your whole perspective of that person will change. Will change. That's why that writer was saying you've got to have a willing speaker and a willing listener. And so it's not only be careful what you say, but wisdom speaking would say, be careful who you listen to. Be careful of the people you hang around and what they say. We need to stop. When gossip is passed to us, it needs to end right there. We need not to pass it on. This is the quarrelsome nature. Again, what you say, when you say it, how you say it. Like a coating of glaze over earthenware, fervent lips with an evil heart. Our fervent lips with an evil heart. Again, I remember I said that out of our heart comes our words. Now, what would happen is, in that day and time, they would make a pot out of clay, a clay pot. And that's what they used for bowls and dishes and storage. Now, they would take silver and purify it, and then take the remaining dregs after the impurities that are burned out of the silver. That's the silver dregs. They would take that and coat it on this piece of pottery. Now, what does it do? It makes that piece of pottery look like it's made out of silver. And guess what? A silver bowl is worth a lot more than an earthen bowl. So what you're doing is you're making it appear to be something that it's not. Well, that's what he says is going on here. He says, like coating a glaze over earthenware are the fervent lips of an evil heart. What we say from an evil heart may often be glazed over, made to sound like it's pleasant, made to sound like it's good, made to sound like that it's something we would want to repeat. But he's saying, be careful, because flattery, and the most obvious expression of this would be flattery. When somebody is praising you for all of these things, making you feel like you're much better than you really are, be careful. They're glazing over something that is not as valuable to make you think that it's much more valuable. He says we need to be careful what we say. We need to be careful how we say it. We need to be careful when we say it. And we need to be careful what we listen to. The role of the gossiper, the quarrelsome person, this idea of flattery, all of these can cause disruption in relationships, in families, in community. It can cause real issues. Well, let's look down to verse 23. We got that one, verse 24. A man disguises himself with his lips, but in his heart he harbors deceit. This is following up on that last statement. He can disguise himself with how he says it. He can disguise himself and make it sound like he's sincere. But you need to be careful as you listen, because he can try to disguise. His words may try to disguise the evil that's in his heart. Though his speech is charming, do not believe him, for 7 abominations fill his heart. Now, the idea of an abomination is that which is contrary to God. And the idea of 7 abominations is not meant to be literally 1 through 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7 means whole or complete. In other words, his heart is completely evil. He is completely filled with abominations. And he says, be careful. A man's words can be so charming, and if you're not listening carefully, you can in fact be deceived by his pretty words. His malice may be concealed by deception, but his wickedness will be exposed in all the assembly. He may get away with it for a while. He may be persuasive, but be careful. He will eventually he will be exposed. Eventually, the assembly. Now, the assembly would mean in public. It may mean in the church. But it's the idea that others are going to recognize him for who he is. He's going to be like the one making the false promises of giving. They're going to recognize who he is. So just be careful. Be careful of who you listen to and examine their motives carefully. And then he says, if a man digs a pit, he will fall in it. If a man rolls a stone, it will roll back on him. These are the consequences of this evil heart. These are the consequences of this evil heart speaking and deceiving people. Now, there's two pictures here. One is of digging a pit. Now, we don't think much about it in our society, but in their society, in that day and time, one of the ways that you would either protect your city from enemy, or you would try to catch an animal, would be to dig a trap, dig a pit, cover it loosely with leaves and limbs, so that when that person comes along, or that animal comes along, they would trip and fall into it, and you would have stopped them. Okay? That's the digging a pit. And he says, the evil heart, the man with the evil heart, is like the man who digs a pit. He's going to fall in it. That's the consequence of this evil heart. Eventually, it will come back to be his destruction. Now, rolling a stone. And this one really is far removed from us. In that day and time, one of the ways that a city would protect itself is if they lived on one side of a mountain and an army was coming on the other side of the mountain, they would get a large stone, and with sheer human effort, they would roll this stone up to the top of the mountain and then over the mountain to roll down and kill the enemy army. And he says, when you're trying to do that, that stone will roll back on you and kill you. Again, it's the same idea. The evil heart has this consequence of destruction. You will be destroyed by your own evil acts. So he's saying, be careful. Be careful. A lying tongue hates those it hurts, and a flattering mouth works ruins. Okay, now we're back to what you say. A lying mouth. When you tell a lie to someone, it's basically the fact he's saying you hate them. You hate them. Deceitful words. Why would you want to deceive somebody unless you didn't have their best interest in heart? You hate them. A lying tongue hurts the victim. One writer wrote, lying is an act of hatred. In one way or another, lies destroys those whom they deceive. Therefore, the liar despises not only the truth, but his victims as well. Something to consider. A flattering mouth, deceptive words, it brings ruin. It brings ruin. A flattering mouth builds pride and is an attempt to manipulate and deceive. So be aware of a flattering mouth. All the way through these passages, Solomon is saying to his son and to us, be wise in what you say, when you say it, how you say it, and then be wise in who you choose to listen to and who you choose to react to. He's saying, remember, wisdom, the beginning wisdom is the fear of Yahweh, relationship with God. When you have God in your heart, your words, how you say them, what you say, when you say it, the way you say it, that should all reflect that relationship in your heart. And he says you can watch it. Be careful, because you know the one who is making false promises, the one who's always flattering, the one who's always gossiping, there's evil in their heart. And you need to stand clear, because gossip is like fine mortals, tasty. They go all the way down to the inside, and they can have an impact on your spiritual life. Let's pray. Father, we pray that you would give us guidance and wisdom. Help us to know what to say, when to say it, how to say it. Help us, Father, to take a stand and refuse to participate in the quarrels and the gossip. Father, help us that our words would always reflect your love, that our words would be a reflection on you, and for what you do for us and through us as we commit ourselves, even our mouths, to you. We thank you and praise you in Jesus' name. Amen. Thank you.